Good morning. It's Glenn here with War for the West. Want to answer the question, what is woke? There's so much talk about this woke right thing deep down in the sort of right-wing conservative circles now. Brought on mainly by James Lindsay jumping on this term. And I don't really want to get in that fight because it's a stupid fight that takes us nowhere. And it's really made me lose all interest in James Lindsay, who is a guy I learned a tremendous amount from over the years. It's really sad to see what's happened. And frankly, I don't understand why he's gone so crazy here. What I'm going to do is define what woke is. And after this, you should be very clear that James Lindsay isn't using the term right, which is crazy because some of what I've learned here, I learned from listening to James Lindsay lectures. So we're in crazy land now, and this is what scares me most about the right. Is some of the most sometimes in our politics is all the craziness going on the right now. It's not great. Okay, so what is woke? Woke is to be conscientized, meaning woken up to the social conditions around you and the nature of the oppressive conditions you live in. Yeah? This idea of conscientization was created by a guy named, guess what? Paulo Freire, okay? That's the father of woke. Now, of course, you have to understand, the left pretty much controls and dominates the digital space, right? So finding this information out is very hard for you to do. So let me have a little fun here. Let's say we wanted to know who the father of woke is, and why is Paulo Freire called the father of woke? And by the way, I'm going to prove this later on. We're just going to start out with this question. It's very interesting. I went to Perplexity. By the way, if you're still using Google search, you're missing many, many tricks out there. Perplexity is not a search tool per se, but it's an AI tool that operates more like a search tool. So, and I have no skin in the game. I'm doing nothing. I don't know anybody. It's just awesome. And it's different than Google AI, which I don't trust, right? So what you get here, I asked the question, basically, why is Paulo Freire called, you can't see that, sorry, it's up in the bar up top, the father of woke? And here's the answer. Of course. Listen to how precise the AI is here. Oh, Paulo Freire is not officially called the father of woke. How would he officially get that name? There's no organization that gives out names like that. Do you understand how deceptive the first sentence is? Yeah. So, but his ideas have significantly influenced critical pedagogy, and social justice movements, which are often associated with woke culture. Incorrect. What happened is people studying social and emotional learning and his pedagogy of the oppressed in the education schools started to give a nickname for this term of conscientizing themselves and then children in the schools as being woke. I'm awake, and once I'm awake, now I'm woke. So woke is not waking up. Woke is somebody who's already awoken, right? And what have they awoken to? They've awoken to the social conditions that they live in, exactly described by critical theory, okay, which exactly described by Marxists. By the way, you could read some of this Freire stuff and not realize he's a Marxist. It's very interesting to me. So let's go back and read about who Paulo Freire is, okay? And this is important. He was born and raised in Recife, Brazil. He was very poor. I don't know if you know what Recife is like. Here's a quick snapshot for you. I've actually wrote a novel that took place about 40% of it in Recife. And it was actually the first time I tried writing about a place I hadn't been. I took this as an experiment. I learned a tremendous amount about Recife. It is desperately poor. People live in favelas, which are these ghettos in Brazil. They're in shanties, with corrugated roof tops. They're stealing, electricity from people by jacking wires and phone community, all that kind of stuff is going on. Recife is a very bad place to have grown up. He also grew up, he's born in 1910 or something like that, right? Or when he was born. He died in 21, sorry. He died in 97. So he also came of age in Brazil before many of the social challenges that were very, very pronounced in Brazil were attempting to be dealt with. This is how the sort of communists come to power in Brazil, in fact, to deal with a lot of this inequality and problems. So like many Marxists, he takes the local conditions he was raised in and he projects them on the world. It's what Marx did in Europe, assuming the whole world was riven with class and aristocracy issues just the way Europe was. And this is why Americans were like, what? Where's our... We don't understand. And by the way, we built a class structure and aristocracy subsequently. But that was not the case when Marx came out. So Freire comes from this perspective. Very poor, no chance. But interestingly, somehow or another, his family did okay. Then he managed to get to university. He worked to develop pedagogy that could liberate through conscientization. So that's where the term woke comes from, is this conscientization process. Now, it's supposedly based on critical theory. It's critical pedagogy. He argues through a traditional education, students were being dehumanized and in order to reassert their own humanity. So by the way, you should know, this is all under the rubric of social and emotional learning in our educational system now. Yeah? So what they did is they took this Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is the book he wrote, yeah, and they applied it in the educational schools basically in the 80s, theoretically, and then rolled it into the curriculum in the 90s. And now all the teachers we produced in the past 20, 30 years, of all of them, 80 or 90% have their brains soaked with this stuff as how to teach. They took down traditional pedagogy with Paulo Freire's ideas, and most of you have never heard of him. Think about that. Every single teacher who's gone through education school knows who Paulo Freire is. Go ask, you know what you do? When you go to your parent-teacher conference, ask her about Paulo Freire and social emotional learning and its reliance on Marxist teachings and why that is the center of their pedagogical thinking. You'll get very interesting answers from them. I'm not going to go through and teach you all this stuff about critical theory because I think that would get boring here. But there's this idea about critical theory that essentially is really good in some ways, right? It's about questioning the existing order of things. But the problem is the way the Marxists do it is that they do it from a lens of everybody's oppressed and we've got to overthrow it and create a new order. It's not we just like maybe can deal with some problems in society. It's that the whole thing is corrupt and needs to be thrown out. And you see, his thinking is born of this. So let's go and talk about what critical theory means, because it comes up a lot now. And you're presented this idea of critical theory as really, not being Marxist or anything like it. You say Marxism, you're cultural Marxism, you're just crazy. No. Critical theory is the way you actually change society, and it's done in a very particular way from a very particular perspective. So, for example, let's be clear. So let me define it here as per, again, I use perplexity here. Perplexity is awesome. Critical theory is a philosophical approach that aims to critique and transform society by integrating normative perspectives that empirically form an analysis of social conflicts or traditions. Emerged in Germany in 1930s, primarily developed by the Frankfurt School of Sociology. Frankfurt School of Sociology is where all the Marxists were. They came to the United States in the 1930s and formed the New School for Social Research, which was actually Columbia and a few others helped them set up in the United States, which was the leading Marxist intellectual institution in the United States. They never finished the sentences for you, too, right? It's interesting. Frankfurt School. They talk about the Frankfurt School is all like they just did sociology. By the way, there's a reason that sociology is so Marxist is because Marx is considered, and Engels, Marx and Engels, the two critical first Marxist theorists, are the grandfathers of sociology in many schools of sociological thought. Like if you go take a Sociology 101 course, you might see a slide that says Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels are the fathers of sociology. They really created the whole movement of sociology. Getting dipped in deep enough yet? Who created critical theory? Max Horkheimer, famous Marxist. By the way, this all predates the postmodernists. You're told this is all the postmodern problem. A lot of this critical theory stuff, and a lot of this focus on discourse and seeing the oppression happening through all kinds of power in society, not just capital. Like Marx looked at this from a materialistic perspective, right? These guys took it to the next level. Theodor Adorno, major Marxist, right? I mean, Herbert Marcuse. Go look. You live in a world visualized by Herbert Marcuse. He went on to be in UCLA. Ronald Reagan ran him out of the UCLA. Not UCLA. He was at UCLA. I remember. Maybe UC Berkeley. No, it wasn't LA. Doesn't matter. He was in the California State University system, and Reagan actually ran him out of the state for being a Marxist revolutionary. What happened is these are revolutionary ideas that we just let go into the academy, right? And then there's a second generation of critical theory. And look at this here, the description. Critical theory draws inspiration from various philosophical traditions, including German idealism, Marxism, and Freudian psychoanalysis. There it is. He has built a pedagogy based on Marxism. Okay, let me stop right here. If you're not doing critical theory from the perspective of seeing oppressed and oppressors, you're not doing critical theory. Critical theory is not just criticizing whatever way you want. It's a very specific praxis inside of Marxism that identifies power and oppression in very specific ways. Here's what's crazy. What James is doing is looking at the legitimate complaints of whites and Christians who are being discriminated against, certainly in the West, absolutely, institutionally now. That's been proved many times over. Okay, if I have to convince you of that, I'm talking to the wrong people, right? And he's claiming that reacting to that makes us woke. If you're woke, you accept the entire Marxist philosophical stack. There's no way a right-winger can do that because the Marxist philosophical stack is all about destroying traditional classical liberal society. Marxism and progressivism, socialism, these are different ideas. I'm not going to define them all today. I've done other videos on this stuff. They all inherit from a very specific way of looking at the world that is not transformable into another philosophical belief system or another foundation. Like, if you're on the right and you're saying, hey, we're being discriminated against, that doesn't make you woke. People get discriminated against institutionally. It's happened to blacks. It's happened to everybody in our society. Noting it and trying to fix it is to not be woke. And I think he views this from a very Christian nationalist perspective, and a lot of those people are complete whack job idiots who I want to have nothing to do with. So I understand his revulsion there, but and I think where this comes from, by the way, with James Lindsay, I am going to explain a little bit of this now. James is an atheist, in case you don't know. He talks about Christianity a lot, but he actually is an atheist, and I think he is horrified by the idea of Christian nationalism. I think he thinks it's worse than Nazism or something like that. I really do, if you got him to sit down and talk about it. And this is where, I just look at him and I'm like, how do people who are so brilliant make such major intellectual errors, right? And what you find very quickly is that James is triggered by his atheism, I think. And I look at the Christian nationalists and I weigh out all the possible futures I could live in. I don't want to live in a Christian nationalist society, by the way. I'm a classical liberal guy. I think we can save it. I think it's got to be basically people of European heritage for the most part. We trickle in non-European heritage, non-Christian people, very, very low rates. They become us. We don't become them. I do think this Western civilization stuff is very important. Yeah? And if the worst came to worst and somebody wanted to start a Christian nation, that would be 1,000 times better than living in a Muslim nation, James. 1,000 times better than living in socialism and Marxism. And I don't know why you can see that, because the virtues of Christianity are what gave rise to classical liberalism and the society you claim to love so much. I mean, just go back and read Thomas Aquinas, look at his position as the philosopher of Catholicism and natural law, and then how that comes to natural rights. None of that happens without Christianity, James. Christianity is a civilizing influence on humanity. It's been very successful at doing it at scale. And I'm not saying I would fight a Christian nation, but I would take living in a Christian nation over any Marxist socialist country, over any Islamic country, or any just petty tyrant dictator, because at least we'd have some values and virtues that are objective to measure our nation, our leadership against. And in many ways, James, what you've done is you're taking the reaction of those people who rightly feel set upon, because, as you know, this attack on our culture started 90, 100 years ago. We have 5 generations coming on now of people who've been subverted. If you want to look at a generation's 20 years, right? People have been subverted by this Marxist influence and pressed into our society. And by the way, they intentionally go into our institutions. They're told that that's the way to change the world, right, when they're in school, right? And so we're at the end of 90 years of this anti-Christian, anti-white stuff going, anti-Western stuff, anti-Christian stuff, eventually morphing into anti-whiteness. And that's where we sit today. Fighting anti-whiteness doesn't make you woke, it makes you smart. Here's the last thing I want to say to James that I think needs to be said. Pick a side. Pick a side, son. You live in a fantasy world. And it's too bad because he's one of the most brilliant people as well. Let's go back to Paulo Freire. Let's just talk about some of his ideas, right? So he believes that the entire educational process is bankrupt, right? He believes that education internalizes. Look at this here. This is so great. I'll say how he says it. The oppressed, having internalized the image of the oppressor and adopted his guidelines, are fearful of freedom. In other words, we are indoctrinating children to not want to be free. And that we're brainwashing them to identify with their oppressors and see them. It's really crazy, right? This is why education for critical consciousness, or conscientization, is needed. Conscientization is the most critical approach to reality, stripping it down so as to get to know the myths that deceive and perpetuate the dominating structure. This is all part of woke, okay? And it's used, and that, by the way, this is where they've adopted postmodern focus on discourse, a la Foucault and others. Herbert Marcuse blended this Marxist ideas and social and critical theory and postmodernism's focus on discourse so brilliantly at the same time that Paulo is developing this. They're like companion readers. You should read Herbert Marcuse and Paulo Freire. Just spend a few weeks researching those guys and you'll realize exactly where we're at. The left is trying to bring about the world that Herbert Marcuse and Paulo Freire dreamed of. Yeah? So, I suggest that you understand what woke means before you run around saying idiotic things that make you a fool. And I do think it's not just James Lindsay who's gotten sideways on this. I think there's a lot of people on the right who are now claiming to understand the left who don't really understand at all. Put it this way, your acid test for anybody who claims to know the left and Marxism is, do you know who Paulo Freire is? Do you know what social and emotional learning is? Do you know what conscientization is? And do you know how that's affected the curriculum in public schools? Because at the end of the day, this is the ideology behind public schooling in the West today, certainly in the United States. Yeah? Okay. Thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful. Please let me know if I've hit the mark again. I don't get much feedback to these things. It really drives me crazy. It's really helpful to know if I've done something useful here. Thanks. Have a great day. Glenn with War from the West, out.